Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Live Epically Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Nicole, and today is going to be a little bit different. I'm actually recording the podcast so that people can watch it on video on YouTube, or maybe on other social media apps, but for you to also be able to tune in at your leisure. So today we are talking about alcohol. We are talking about signs that you might be in an addiction toward alcohol. And I wanted to narrow this down to 5 signs, but as I started brainstorming what these signs were, reflecting on my own journey of realizing, oh crap, I have an addiction to alcohol, I realized there's more than that. So I'm actually going to walk you through 10 signs that you could have an unhealthy relationship and actually an addiction to alcohol. And this is coming from someone who next month is 6 years sober. I am 38, and when I was 32, I actually quit, and it was not my first attempt, it was not my second attempt, it was my third attempt. And I want to outline that the attempts to get sober and then the failure to succeed were actually all part of the healing journey of kicking this habit, because I actually had to learn for myself, oh, I am addicted because that's why I returned to using, because it was actually that hard, right? So I also want to preface this, share that back in the day when I was drinking, especially when I was in the peak of it, because there was different frequencies I experienced along the way, but there was most certainly a phase where I thought the idea of becoming sober would be impossible, absolutely impossible. I never ever thought the cravings or just simply the desire to use would ever go away, which it 100% has, and it went away at such a fast pace. I also previously believed that even if I ever did succeed at getting sober, that would mean I'd be some sort of rejected hermit in society, that I wouldn't fit in, that I'd stick out like a sore thumb. I thought it meant that the best times of my life were over and life was just going to get boring, and that I wouldn't be able to do social occasions, and I really just thought it meant like, wow, life is gonna suck because of this. But at the same time, I knew I wanted to get sober, so it felt like a catch-22, and that's what kept me normalizing my use and continuing to participate in this habit that really wasn't serving me. So we're gonna get into it. I invite you to listen along and listen with an open mind, because trust me, I know when someone actually has an addiction and they hear information that could trigger them to think, maybe for the first time, oh, wow, I wonder if I have an addiction. It can be a deeply triggering experience, because I remember sitting in my bed. I was 28 years old. I remember it was May of being 28. So I guess literally 10 years ago. And it's the first time I actually genuinely sat with myself. I was reading an article about someone's alcoholism, and it's the very first time I actually consciously processed, oh, I think I'm addicted to alcohol. And looking back with the wisdom I now have, I actually can say that I was addicted to alcohol from the first time I started using at 14 or 15. But I was so deeply entrenched in a certain lifestyle with a certain peer group that it normalized the way I used it, and I was in such deep denial of how it was impacting my life. So in any case, we are going to get into the 10 signs, and there's likely a lot more that you could be addicted to alcohol. And on future episodes and videos and podcasts, I'm going to be sharing so much more information, and the exciting, the empowering stuff, the information about how to kick it, how to stay sober, how to build an epic life, not a life based on compromise of like, oh, life sucks now because I had to quit, but no, life gets better and better and better and better. I could shout this from the motherfucking rooftop. Life only gets better the longer you stay sober. You only get happier the longer you stay sober. You only get healthier. You start looking younger. Every facet of your life, even relationships that sometimes one thinks, well, that's the lubricant of relationships. It's what helps me connect with people. Oh, just you wait and see the improvement in your friendships, in the kinds of friends you attract. But okay, getting on a side tangent there, we're going to get into the 10 signs you might be addicted to alcohol. Okay, and these are in no particular order. I've jotted down some notes to share with you. So the first sign, okay, I'm going to stop. You could have a couple of these signs and it might not mean you have alcoholism. Alcoholism means you're addicted to alcohol. And alcoholism, by the way, isn't dependent on the frequency you use, because if someone looked at the frequency I used, they would be like, wow, I use a lot more than you, Christine, and I'm not an alcoholic. So that just shows kind of the collective impression of what actually constitutes an addiction or not an addiction. So again, these are in no particular order. So the first sign that implies you might be addicted is that you find yourself leaning on alcohol after a stressful day, coming home from a long day at work. Maybe you've gone through a breakup and you're experiencing heartache. Maybe there's some sort of setback. You have disappointment and you notice that already negative scenario you're using as justification to pour that wine in the bathtub that night. Or, I'll have a second glass after dinner. It's normalizing, well, I have to do this because I'm in some sort of emotional pain or stress and I deserve to take the edge off. So it's this self-soothing mechanism. And someone might not look at that as a problem, but it most certainly can be, because it's not very often in life we aren't faced with a scenario that is going to cause some sort of emotional experience that does want to be self-soothed. And there's a lot of healthful and helpful ways to do it that don't cause some aspect of hindrance in our lives or in our health. So the second sign you might be addicted is you notice you lean on alcohol to combat some level of social anxiety. And what's interesting is I would have identified as someone who doesn't have social anxiety. I would have identified as someone who's actually like friendly, relatively outgoing, maybe even more on the extrovert side of the spectrum. But as I quit alcohol, I learned something that was so surprising. I'm not an extrovert by nature. My natural nature is actually being introverted. And so much of that outwardly expressive personality in social situations was only because of the booze, but it wasn't actually the authentic me. The authentic me is actually a bit more shy. I know I seem outwardly expressive in these content shares, but I'm just alone in my living room right now, But what I discovered starting to going to social events without the crutch of feeling that buzz going through my veins is I would feel some degree of that angst feeling, that social anxiety, and almost a bit of like apprehension on being super authentic. It didn't come as naturally as I maybe hoped it would. Now, over the years of being sober so long, it absolutely does come naturally. I'm authentic wherever I go, but that's been a byproduct of having to do the inner work and look at, well, why did I rely on that to feel confident in a social situation? And how can I grow my confidence in who I am without it being dependent on that vice, right? And again, it doesn't mean that everyone has like extreme social anxiety who drinks, but there can be a spectrum of like a little bit of social anxiety going into like a wedding with all these people you've never met before, or going to a partner's work party and meeting all these people you've never met before. There can be some level on the spectrum, some people on the higher end, some people on the lower end. Okay, so the third sign you might be addicted to alcohol is that you used to actually only drink at social occasions. So this was the case for me, and I'll break down my personal story with this. But then you find you've gotten into this place in life where you start to crave it, even outside of social situations, to the point that you want to consume it alone. This is a really, really big sign, because it's actually cueing you up that there's been a development of a physiological addiction, craving, because it's not even about being at a friend's wedding and like celebrating and da-da-da-da-da. It's actually like, oh, I'm home alone and I have an urge to pour a glass of wine. Well, if people aren't even around, like why am I craving this? What's going on in my body? Where did I experience some sort of trigger in my emotional state, in my physiological state, to be like, oh, I wonder if I should go buy alcohol. So that feeling started happening to me for the very first time. I think I would have been 27. So, I started drinking, I think in like grade 9, not often, but then more regularly in high school, like grade 10, grade 11, grade 12. And then I really entered the party scene with my friends. We were going to the bars multiple times a week. As young adults, I would sleep on a friend's couch, wake up in the morning, be so sleep deprived and hungover, like ill, but I'd drag my butt to waitress and do that on repeat. And somehow, I honestly look back and I don't know how I did this. I scrimped up enough pennies and savings, and I was able to, like 2 years after this lifestyle of like drinking and partying and waitressing and I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment at the time that I had moved into at 17. And how I afforded all this, I don't know. Like I didn't, like in any case, we're not going to get off topic with that, but I ended up getting into college and then upgrading to university, where I went for 5.5 years, and I actually became a certified exercise physiologist. And the irony of all of that is it was such a health related career, and then I worked in that for 9 years, but yet simultaneous, there was this like alter ego side of me who was living a lifestyle with like specific to booze, because I was healthy with other aspects of life, but specific to booze that showcased I didn't prioritize health whatsoever. And so what happened is, my friends and I, we were big partiers, and I wasn't different than the circle I was spending time with. I wasn't drinking more than the circle I was with. Maybe there was times where I would get more drunk than some or black out faster than some, because blacking out was a big part of my alcohol experience in my late teens and 20s. But it was also part of my friends, whether it was friends from high school or friends I met in the restaurant industry. I attracted people who were quite reflective of who I was also being in my life. So it made me feel like nothing's wrong. And because there was so many social occasions and going out for this and going out for that and, getting off a waitress shift. And, I waitressed all the way until I was 24 when I landed my corporate career as that exercise physiologist and primary therapist. And that was like the first time I had to kind of like reel in my partying and be like, okay, I gotta go to bed on time because I gotta wake up on time and go to the office. But where I'm going with this is, as my career started taking form in my mid-20s and I started doing like more adult responsible things, I bought a house and, I got into a serious relationship, I noticed that the frequency I was able to go and actually party and get drunk with my friends, it started declining. But the problem was, when that happened, my awareness started becoming illuminated. Oh, my cravings to drink alcohol, they aren't exclusive to only being in a party scenario. So it's like I never even thought in a million years to drink alcohol alone. From the time I started to the time of being like 26, it never crossed my mind. I never desired to pour a glass of wine after work ever. But the very first time I noticed, oh, I'm going to like swing into the liquor store and buy beer, because wine wasn't my thing. Beer was my thing. Like craft beer was my thing. So I found myself being like, well, I deserve this. I work hard. I have this career now. I bought this house. I have a backyard. And so I justified, I get to stop in and buy beer on the way home from work. And I get to sit on my back deck and enjoy this beer out in the sun. And yes, at face value, it seems harmless, because in previous years, I was drinking my face off or getting blackout and sleeping on couches. So this seems like a lot more modest approach. But I'm bringing this up because how does someone become addicted? Like, there has to be an evolution of the desire, and there has to be a process of like not knowing you're addicted to learning you're addicted. So for me, when I was starting to drink solo, meaning like a couple of beers after work, maybe like one day a week, it totally felt harmless. But the thing is, and you're going to hear as in a future broadcast about like how my addiction really ramped up and how it truly became alcoholism. I'm going to share about that particular part of the journey in a future episode. But for today, I just want to highlight part of my journey on realizing I was addicted and actually becoming addicted. It was the transition of when I used only in social scenarios, never thought twice about drinking alone. And then suddenly I was starting to drink alone. Okay? So again, I'll share more about how that then like went off the deep end in a future episode. Okay, so that was the third sign. The fourth sign is you find yourself waking up after using alcohol the night prior and you're actually feeling like you're in a lower emotional state. If you're familiar with Abraham Hicks and actually a lot of other teachers, there's an emotional guidance scale which shows really positive emotions to not so good emotions that indicate our frequency. And it's really hard to go from a lower emotion. Some of the lowest emotions off the top of my head are guilt, shame, guilt and shame. Oh, because we're going to get into that in a moment here. Also hatred, jealousy, boredom, and depression, lethargy. Those are some of the lowest emotional states. You might think anger should be down there, but anger is actually an improved emotional state than those other feelings because it actually has a sense of empowerment, like you're going to like do something about the situation versus feeling almost like despondent, apathetic to the situation, right? So our emotional guidance system, the way we feel, it is a feedback loop cueing us up if something we're doing or involved in or a situation or a way we're thinking is good for us or not good for us. So if you wake up the day after using alcohol and you feel eagerness for life, optimism, energy, like you want to put on your runners and go run a mountain, if you feel like you want to eat really healthy, if you feel like you have a robust sex drive, if you feel just this vitality when you wake up the day after drinking, then that's your emotional guidance system giving you this feedback loop. That's a good decision for me. Let's keep doing this. If you feel rested. But if you wake up the next day and your emotional guidance system is giving this feedback loop to you that is not those feelings, that's your guidance. That's your wise guide inside saying that is not good for me whatsoever. That's not going to improve the direction of my life whatsoever. It's like one goes up, the other one is only going downward and only attracting more situations, scenarios that are at that same level, at that same frequency. So it was so common that I would wake up feeling guilty. Oh, I think my video froze. I just want to double check here. Interesting. My video looks like it's frozen, but I'm going to keep talking just in case it starts working again. So here we go. Okay, so we're going to move on to the fifth sign that you may be addicted to alcohol. It's actually disassociating your behavior while on alcohol from actually being who you are. So let's say you had booze last night and you got really messy at the end of the night, or you contributed or even instigated a fight, or you did something that embarrassed yourself. You did something that didn't reflect your highest self. Let's say that happened. While it's very common when you're in an addiction to allow, like your ego does not want to have its sense of self negatively impacted whatsoever. So it will like fight to uphold this certain perception of oneself. So it will have us, and I'm including myself because this is certainly what I did for many years, it would disassociate that behavior from actually being me. Even though it was clearly me, who else is in my body last night, I would disassociate like, well, that doesn't count. I was drunk. Oh, that doesn't count. I didn't even know I was doing that. So it bypasses someone from taking accountability for who they're embodying. How you behave, how you are, is what you're in embodiment of. So to say all of those moments in your life where you're embodying certain traits, oh, that doesn't count, that's not me, it's not taking ownership. And that is what the ego will do to keep justifying it's okay to keep doing the habit that causes me to not actually be in embodiment of my highest self. I remember I was working in that profession, in that health field, and we'd have client intakes, and the doctors would question their health habits pertaining to drinking, and they'd say their frequency. And there was like never, rare, occasional, and like basically the next category was a heavy drinker. And I remember thinking, whoa, me and every single one of my friends are considered a heavy drinker on the actual like medical guidelines. And I will tell you right now that so many people who think they are an occasional drinker, I will assure you on the medical guidelines, you're classified as a heavy drinker, right? The people who were classified as an occasional drinker, it was like a drink every couple of months. It was certainly not having alcohol every week, right? So that's something that's definitely not like public awareness of like what constitutes someone being a heavier drinker. We have an impression it's like the old guy down on his luck who's drinking a 2-6 a day. No, it can be someone who has 7 units of alcohol a week, whether it be 1 glass a night or actually getting drunk 1 time on the weekend. And that was the case for me. At the time of quitting the habit, I was moderating it with like a white knuckle grip of willpower to 4 times a month I'd get intoxicated. I mean, there was phases in my addiction where I got drunk a lot more than that, but that was like in the last several months of really trying to manage it and try to like prevent myself from moving forward on the craving. It was about 7 units a week. Okay? There's people maybe listening to this who are like, whoa, I have like 3 drinks a night. Well, does that equal 21 units a week? Does that equal an addiction? Absolutely, that is 100% an addiction. If something is that huge, if that taking up such a large part of your lifestyle, it absolutely is an addiction. Your body's expecting it daily. It's an addiction. Okay? So the 6th sign you might be addicted to alcohol is noticing you're actually now sometimes looking for a social event or saying yes to a get together with friends, not so much because you just genuinely want to go to that thing, because deep down inside, maybe you know you wouldn't go if you had to go with no alcohol involved. So maybe there's looking at an outlet to be able to consume without then feeling guilty about consuming, because hey, I'm not drinking alone. I'm with friends, so it's okay, and they're also drinking. So that is something I definitely started doing because I was feeling so much guilt and shame. The more I started drinking alone, the more I started having that 1 beer that turned into 2 beers, that turned into even getting drunk alone at my house. I was like, okay, we gotta pull this in, Christine. So I remember going to outings, and it wasn't even for the outing. It was just so that I could move forward on the craving to have some and feel less guilty about it. Okay, that might not be the case for everyone, but that was one of the signs for my journey. And at that phase, I knew I had a problem. At that phase of doing that behavior, I was aware, oh shit, I'm addicted to alcohol. Okay, so the 7th sign you might be addicted to alcohol is intentionally surrounding yourself with people who are deeply entrenched with drinking, with the drinking lifestyle. Anything to help the ego normalize your behavior. And that's what I did. I didn't have comparison to this like ginormous other group of people who lived and led their lives in different ways and who woke up Saturday morning and actually went to the gym and didn't need greasy food to feel better, but ate healthy. People who were like into doing awesome things physically, people who had ambition and creativity and were like so ambitious they were able to like build businesses, like all of that paradigm that I'm now part of. There, the video's working again. So if you're listening to the podcast, disregard what I'm saying now, but the video's back on. So I didn't even know there was a world that existed beyond the world I was in, which made it so hard for me to even envision life beyond drinking without thinking it meant like I'm a loner, I'm a hermit, I'm a reject from society, because I didn't understand there was this amazing, high vibe, very successful group of people in society who just don't drink, right? So of course, if you only know one paradigm, and if you think you now can't do the thing, drinking, that everyone in that paradigm or that friend group does, you do feel like, wow, I'm going to be quite lonely. And in the beginning phase of me trying to get sober, I did have to let go of a lot of friends and environments that would have never supported me show up and be sitting there at the table not drinking when that was the culture and that was how the bonding took place. I tried it twice, and by the second time of trying that, never again. And I never hung out with that friend group ever again, and they were friends from childhood. And I know that sounds harsh, but when you are faced with a choice point, a fork in the road of how you're going to live the rest of your life, you're willing to do hard things. And it didn't happen overnight, but I eventually attracted a new friend group, and they showed up as a byproduct of me coming into greater and greater and greater levels of alignment with my higher calling, my alignment with my own purpose, my deeper knowing of who I actually am, my pursuit of my own passions, and really just following my own interests. This new friend group started showing up, and I can tell you that the friendships I have in my life right now are the most deeply fulfilling and close relationships I've ever had, ever, that I love my friends. I feel so deeply seen and supported by them. And I would have never been able to find these kinds of relationships if I thought, oh, it just doesn't exist without alcohol. Because they do. Like last night, I just went out with my best friend and we had a wonderful time at paint night, right? People were drinking at paint night. We weren't. We were still having a gay old time. So the eighth sign you might have an addiction. Okay, this isn't even a might have an addiction. The eighth sign, if you're doing this, you have an addiction. Okay, get ready for it. It is hiding evidence that you drank. So this is going to be apparent if you live with someone who might not have a full awareness of how much alcohol you do consume. So this started happening to me when I was 28, when I first started questioning, like, what is going on here? Like, do I have a problem? Is I started feeling guilty about having alcohol when he wasn't home. This was a long-term relationship. I was in my 20s, and he had night shifts that he'd go work at. And if his night shift landed on one of these days that I got the craving driving home from work, oh, it's a sunny day, I kind of want some beer, and oh, I really like that craft beer. And then I was like, oh, before I know it, I'm pulling into the liquor store and I buy a 6-pack, and before I know it, that night, the one led to 2, led to 3, led to 4, and I don't want my partner to know alone I had all of this beer. So I found myself doing things like hiding the bottles, or like intentionally putting the bottles lower in the recycling bin so they couldn't be seen. I started trying to hide the evidence because I knew I was doing something incongruent with my higher self, and I felt shame about it. I didn't want it to be seen. So the 9th sign you could have an alcohol addiction. Well, this isn't a might either. This is like, this sign means you do. I'm going to be that bold. It's after you have one drink, you actually have an urge arise in your body to have more. That right there, that feeling, that is addiction. Okay? There's no way around it. That feeling is literally addiction. So that happened to me from the very first time I started drinking. That started happening as young as a teenager. So looking back, I know I was always physiologically predisposed to being able to get addicted, where other people, they could just like have a drink and it means nothing and they don't think about it. They don't think about, maybe I should have another. Well, that was not the case for me. Okay? So that is definitely that, and the hiding of bottles is definitely a telltale sign that you are addicted to alcohol. And then the 10th and final sign I came up with is definitely something I implemented when I started deepening my concern about my alcohol use. And it's when you start to create these weird psychological rules in your head about how often you're allowed to, when you shouldn't, when it's okay, when to justify using it. And I need to acknowledge that that very process of your mind trying to like sort out ways in which it's okay and appropriate and ways in which you then won't feel guilty or shameful, that behavior is the addiction. Your brain thinking that way, being all like manipulative, like, okay, if I just no more than like 3 units, or never again will I drink it sober, or I'll only in a social setting, like all of that narrative, that is addiction. We think of addiction purely as being the consumption of it. No. Your brain thinking those ways is addiction. You need to let that sink in, and that's why I'm able to say I had alcoholism even when I was at the like nearing my sobriety date. I had alcoholism even though I had white knuckled it down to consuming 1 time a week, because there was mental fuckery at play in my head about managing it to that level. If I didn't have the willpower that I was exerting, I would have been drinking a lot more often than that. If I had a partner that I was living with at the time who was a big drinker, oh my God, there would have been chaos. Like, we would have been drinking quite a lot, and a lot more than I was. So there was times in my journey where I like was maybe in like the peak of the addiction, maybe more around like 29 or something like that, where there might be a month where I gave in to getting drunk. I think there was 1 month in particular where I gave in to getting drunk by myself, like actually drunk, not just like having some, but I think I actually ended up getting drunk by myself at home. I think there was 1 week in particular that stands out that I did it 3 nights that week. So it's like all weeks weren't like that, all months weren't like that, but that's when I really just like threw caution to the wind, and I just drank when I wanted to drink, even if it was a Tuesday night, even if it was a Thursday night. And so to get legitimately drunk at home alone that many times in a week, you are addicted. I was addicted. And you can go in different phases of it. You can go in phases where you think like, oh, I'm really managing this well. I'm not addicted, you know, and that's a phase I once entered. I entered for about 1.5 years thinking, oh, I'm actually not an alcoholic, because I have been able to like really moderate, and I'm like being such a good girl. And my rule was only drink in social scenarios. So that's what I did. So only in a rare social scenario I would. But it's that mental game. I was like really like trying to hold on to this beast, you know? And inevitably the beast won, because I had just moved into a new condo at the time. And even though I had never drank alone for like the past 1.5 years, I was 32 at this age, I said to myself, well, if I had people helping me move into this new condo, we would have all ordered pizza, we would have kicked back and relaxed, we would have had a couple drinks, it would have been like all fun. And I said to myself, well, just because I had no one to help me move doesn't mean I should not be allowed to do that. That was so much hard work to move by myself. So I was driving home to the condo on the last load of belongings I was bringing over. And this was when I was 31, I guess, somewhere around there. And I justified to myself, I was like, you would have drinking if you were with people. So like allow yourself to have some alcohol. So I bought like 1 big bottle of beer, some sort of craft beer. And I didn't feel bad about it, because I was like, hey, like I didn't need more. I didn't go back to the liquor store. I had that and that was it. But then within a week, I found myself back at the liquor store buying a bottle of wine. And yes, I moderated it. I had probably no more than 1.5 glasses that night. And I thought, good job. See, you can even drink alone. You don't have a problem. And then, okay, all of this was happening in May 2016. And then by summer, I was actually full blown back in the addiction of occasionally getting completely drunk, blackout by myself in my condo. You know, showing up to work being like, what is going on here? I'm in healthcare, and I'm living this secret where I crave alcohol. I have it when I know I shouldn't. I drink more than I want to because the urge develops in my body, and I wake up with guilt, shame, remorse, wondering how the fuck did that happen? How did it escalate to that? I mean, there's 1,000 stories I can tell you about waking up in the morning being like, how did that happen? But I wanted to take you through this journey to understand there's phases where it seems all fun and games. There's phases where it seems normal. There's phases where it seems like not a problem. And gradually it can become a problem. And by October of 2016, I said to myself, because this was like one more day waking up in that condo where I meant to just have like 1 or 2 drinks the night before, and somehow I had way more than that, and I got fully intoxicated on my own, and I woke up feeling probably one of the lowest emotional states I've ever felt, because I couldn't believe that I'm this like strong-willed person. I'm capable of doing hard things, and this thing has power over me that I can't seem to overcome. And I felt hopeless. And I told myself I'm never going to use again. Like, this has to be the rock bottom. And I've already been at rock bottom from using this. This has to be the rock bottom. You guys didn't even hear in this broadcast about getting a traumatic brain injury on my 29th birthday. Like, we have many future episodes to get into other things, but where I'm going with this is part of my own journey in gaining the ability to overcome the addiction is I actually had to go through different phases of awareness of learning like, oh, I actually am addicted. Oh, the fact that I couldn't stay sober even when I tried is a sign I'm addicted. So I ended up relapsing and using again, I think by like the next month. And then May the next year, May 21st, 2017, was the last day I ever woke up with guilt, shame, or hangover. It's the day I got access to freedom and liberation. And I think today on, like, I count my sobriety days, I think I'm at 2,156. And I always say I'm grateful for, however many days. And I say of freedom, liberation, and sobriety. I don't even name it sobriety first, because what does sobriety mean? First, I call it what sobriety has brought me, which is freedom and liberation. So I hope you found value in this episode. Okay, so after listening to all of that, you might be thinking, okay, what's next? If I do have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, or if I do want to cut back or moderate or get sober and stay sober, like, what's the next step, Christine? So that's where this next invite comes in. I've been guided to create a live training, so to cultivate a sense of community and belonging with people out there who are questioning their relationship with alcohol so that they don't feel isolated, alone on this journey. I've decided to create a live training, a masterclass experience in a couple of weeks in May, where I'm going to be walking the group through 5 absolutely necessary steps to either get sober or stay sober or moderate, pending where you are with your journey, whether you know you need to quit or whether you have quit and you just want to be part of the community, or maybe you're just sober curious right now or want to cut back. Wherever you are on that spectrum, this class is for you, because when I was in the phase of contemplating sobriety, I actually thought it seemed impossible and that I'd have to just deal with cravings forever. And I'm here to lead by example that you can change your relationship with alcohol and get to a place where you never ever think about it. It doesn't cross your mind. You don't miss it. You don't crave it. It's literally been eradicated from your consciousness. And when I reflect on what's allowed me to be this way when I was so far away from that before, it's these 5 steps. And I didn't know what these 5 steps were when I was trying to get sober. It's more that hindsight, looking back and seeing, well, what did take place that allowed that? And then what took place that allowed that? And they all, like, together, they all came together and allowed for success. So part of this training, I'm also going to be teaching the class or illuminating 7 myths about alcohol. I'm going to debunk them and help to even change your perception about this substance. So I'm really excited about this training. It means the world to me to be educating on this topic, because out of all the things I've taught on over the last 6+ years in my coaching business, there's nothing that's impacted my life so monumentally and so positively as this area. So the fact that it's taken me this many years to talk on it, it's surprising, but better late than never, right? So I can't wait to see you inside the class if this calls to you. I will have a link somewhere wherever you're watching this, whether it be on my website, bodycherish.ca, or on YouTube in the show notes. If you're hearing it on the podcast, it will be somewhere. Okay. I love you guys, and I'll talk to you later.